Modern Southampton has a diverse population. People coming from all over the world to work, study and live here. A clear example of what multiculturalism is. As a busy cargo port and cruise ship hub, Southampton has cemented its position as being receptive to foreigners. But has this always been the case? When and why did these favourable attitudes to aliens develop? Southampton came to prominence as a medieval port. In 1066, the Norman conquest brought the first alien merchants to the small town of Southampton. Over the course of the medieval period, Southampton prospered as a key English port for imports and exports to Europe. As a thriving hub, Southampton grew to accommodate foreign merchants, who became an integral part of the local population.
Standing here in the 13th century, you would have seen the docks thriving with activity. Alien merchants would have been arriving from all over Europe to buy and sell their goods. However, their fates would have differed immensely.
Several factors would have affected the experiences of aliens in Southampton, such as conflict, changing laws and taxes, and the roles of key individuals.
And by examining the differing experiences of aliens in medieval Southampton, we can ascertain how and why Southampton has become the receptive city it is today.
So, why did foreign merchants come to Southampton?
Southampton, with its long-sheltered harbour and double tides, meant that it was an ideal port for docking ships. Its proximity to London meant that trade was not restricted to the Southampton area.
Woad, a plant used to make blue dye, was a main import in Southampton. Between 1308 and 1309, it accounted for just over 30% of all imports, totalling around £3,700. By 1311, it accounted for almost half of all imports. Hampshire had a huge cloth industry, and so foreign merchants coming to Southampton had a prosperous and attractive market in which to trade. Foreign merchants were also important in Southampton's local economy, not just for imports and exports, but also for the customs taxes, tolls, and duties that they paid.
There were numerous reasons why foreign merchants came to Southampton. With a blossoming local economy, many stayed and were welcomed and sometimes even defended by the locals. Aliens also had many opportunities to climb the social ladder. However, not all would have had the same experience. Let's meet three alien merchants arriving in Southampton. Hans Engelbrecht, a merchant from the Hanseatic League, came to Southampton looking for a better life.
Well, I was a bit apprehensive about coming back to England, if I'm honest. I had a bad experience in London last time I was here, but I've heard it's much better here in Southampton. I really hope this is the case.
Francois Bastille, a veteran French merchant, is returning to Southampton to sell his wine.
This is my 7th time in Southampton. The sea was a bit choppy on the crossing over from Bordeaux, but I've got to know a few of the locals, and my wine's going down a real treat amongst all the social circles.
And finally, Gianni Di Natale, an Italian merchant, is visiting Southampton for the first time and is totally unaware of what to expect.
As soon as I got off the ship, they were demanding custom tolls. I had to pay when I left and now I had to pay again. Ridiculous.
Indeed, there were many factors that would affect the experiences of our three alien merchants.
Every time I come to Southampton, there's a new law or tax that I must abide by. If I stay for more than 6 weeks, I must pay even more money. Luckily, my wine's going straight to the Burgesses, so hopefully I should be on my way back to France really soon.
As trade with foreign merchants evolved over the medieval period, they became subject to ever-changing laws. During the 1260s, there were a number of general protection laws initiated for merchants visiting Southampton, and in 1266, Prince Edward, the future Edward I, granted protection to all alien merchants visiting England. This was further reinforced by acts in the early 14th century that sought to protect merchants. Most notable was the Carta Macaturia in 1303, which allowed merchants free trade, protection under the law, and exemption from some tolls. This was followed by the Ordinance of the Staple in 1353, which gave merchants protection of life and goods. Indeed, the role of foreign merchants was not taken for granted, and measures were put in place to bolster trade.
Why did I come to Southampton? Well, the King's Acts, protection and exclusion from tax is definitely part of it. I mean, the locals aren't a bad bunch either.
However, not all merchants were given the same benefits.
It annoys me so much how the Hans merchants get special treatment, exempt from taxes and given special housing rights.
It was common for different groups of merchants to receive better treatment depending on where they came from.
Henry II granted the merchants from Gotland special rights, then the Spanish, now the men from Bordeaux. Why not everyone?
Foreign merchants were subject to laws governing what, where and when they sold their products. Hosting laws, such as the Act of 1439, meant that foreign merchants, when arriving at an English port, had to go to the mayor's court and present themselves. They were then assigned a local townsperson with whom they had to stay. As with the other laws, some merchants were exempt from these, like those from the Hanseatic League.
However, the hosting laws were not put into operation very effectively in Southampton. The town officials often assisted in its evasion to accommodate their more wealthy alien visitors. Southampton was very reliant on foreign merchants for their trade, therefore it was in their best interests to make staying in Southampton as easy as possible.
I live in the Woolhouse, which gives me a bit more freedom, I guess. I can really see myself starting a family here. I met a merchant last year. I can't remember his name now, but he married a local.
We are now at 58 French Street, a genuine medieval merchant's house. It was known to have been built in the 1290s by John Fortin, a wealthy merchant of Norman origin. As you take a look around, you will see how a medieval merchant would have lived in these times.
We will now make our way into the sleeping quarters of the medieval merchant's house. The medieval merchant John Fortin would have lived and slept in this very room.
Serving both as a business and a residence, the house was fronted by a shop which would sell the wine stored in the underground cellar.
Many medieval merchants' houses would have had undercrofts. This is a surviving example of one today.
Things are good here in Southampton. I just hope England don't start another war. War is bad for business and bad for people like me.
Indeed, England's conflicts within Europe had an effect on trade and the lives of aliens. In 1224, when the war broke out between England and France, French merchants had their English property seized, and there is evidence that many were detained at the Winchester Fair. The 100 Years' War between England and France had a detrimental effect on trade, with merchants being detained and ships seized and even destroyed. The loss of Gascony in 1453 also heavily impacted the wine trade.
We are now outside the Southampton Maritime Museum, which was the Woolhouse in medieval Southampton, and a notable residence for alien merchants. Some merchants settled in Southampton, and indeed some can still be traced to Hampshire today. Alien merchants brought a lot to medieval Southampton, and those that did were rewarded with positions of power and responsibility.
Christopher Ambrogi, of course I've heard of him. Mayor in 1486 and 97, if I remember correctly. Shows what aliens here can achieve. With prospects like that, why wouldn't I settle?
One indication of the experiences of merchants in medieval Southampton was the positions of power and authority that they were elevated to. Christopher Ambrogi, who was made mayor twice in Southampton, would not have had such opportunities in other cities. Although Southampton was very receptive, there were still incidences of conflict in the city.
The first major conflict that arose between the locals and the aliens is when the Venetian state fleet first arrived in 1319. It sparked a major brawl between them, and many were killed on both sides. Not all locals saw the merchants in a positive light. They were jealous that the wealthy aliens could purchase rights and privileges from the king.
No, actually things haven't always been this good. People are still aware of the Venetians since they started coming back. I think it will take a long time before people forget what happened.
Nevertheless, violence against aliens in Southampton was not a common occurrence. In fact, they were generally very well received. The response in other towns, however, was not so tolerant.
When the men of Romsey came to Southampton to rob the Lombards, there was intense fear in the alien community. Luckily, the mayor acted quickly and got the locals to protect the walls. It's comforting to know we will be defended in this way.
Yeah, I've been told about the attempted attack on foreign merchants in Southampton by the men of Romsey. Luckily, they did not receive any local support. If they had, one can only imagine the violence that may have ensued. I myself may have even never come back.
To put the relationship between aliens and the locals of Southampton into context, we can explore the experiences of merchants in other English towns. There were severe riots in London during the mid-15th century. Violent attacks took place on alien minorities, and the local authorities did little to intervene.
These anti-alien sentiments from London spilled over into Southampton in the form of John Payne and John Walker, who in 1460 led a small group of townsmen to seize power. Although this was a small movement, they did unjustly imprison many foreigners.
Obviously, I'm glad that John Payne was removed from power by the king. He only had a few years to victimise us. Now he's gone. Hopefully things will return to normal.
Our three alien merchants show how different experiences could be in the medieval period.
Hans Engelbrecht from the Hanseatic League enjoyed privileges and the ability to settle in Southampton. Francois Bastille, while also having a positive experience, would have had a strikingly different one if he were to have been trading during the many years of war between England and France. Finally, Gianni di Natale, a Venetian merchant who arrived with the State Fleet in 1319, was not so fortunate and was killed in the brawl that took place.
The medieval period was defined by an ever-changing relationship between aliens and the English. Although there were some instances of violence against aliens in Southampton, sometimes instigated by non-Soutonians, it seems that Southampton was one of the better towns to live in England if you were an alien merchant.
Alien merchants in Southampton were awarded many rights and privileges which were not given out in other English towns. Indeed, the locals of Southampton did everything they could to make trading in Southampton as attractive as possible to the aliens, as they were aware that they were dependent on them for their continuing prosperity.
To this day, Southampton remains a key port city in England, not to mention a significant cruise ship hub, welcoming tens of thousands of foreigners every year. Rife with diversity, Southampton is home to many aliens. Whilst no longer coming to trade goods, they instead come to work or study. As in the medieval period, Soutonians today welcome foreigners as one of the driving forces that will continue the city's prosperity well into the future.